My voice has always been my most distinctive and, occasionally, my most misunderstood feature. It's a voice that's rich and deep, a contralto that can command a boardroom, but over the phone often creates a moment of gentle confusion. It's an old story for me, one that usually ends with a quick, polite correction and an equally polite, "Oh, my apologies, ma'am." It's a minor quirk of my biology, something I've long since made peace with. Most people, once corrected, are gracious. Most people are not Frank from OmniGuard Insurance. I was on my lunch break, wedged between a morning of back-to-back meetings and an afternoon that promised more of the same, trying to resolve a mind-numbingly tedious claim. A pipe had burst in my basement the previous month, a low-drama, high-inconvenience event that was now entering its fourth week of bureaucratic entanglement with OmniGuard. After 20 minutes on hold, enduring a tinny, looping piece of instrumental jazz that was surely designed as a mild form of torture, a new voice finally clicked onto the line, drenched in an almost impressive amount of boredom. "Thank you for holding," the voice droned. "My name is Frank. How can I help you today, sir?" And just like that, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple phone call. The first "sir" had been deployed, and the battle for basic respect had, unbeknownst to Frank, just begun. The issue at hand was simple enough, or so it should have been. A plumbing failure had led to a partially flooded basement. The damage wasn't catastrophic, but it was significant enough to require professional water mitigation and replacing a good portion of drywall and flooring. I had filed the claim promptly, submitted the plumber's report, sent photos, and gotten estimates, all with the brisk efficiency I applied to my own work as a project manager. OmniGuard, however, seemed determined to turn this straightforward claim into an epic saga of delays and deflections. Frank was the latest gatekeeper in this saga. "Yes, I see your claim here, sir," he began, the sound of slow, deliberate typing clicking in the background. "It looks like we're still waiting on the adjuster's final assessment of the damage valuation. I sent the adjuster's report in last Tuesday," I stated calmly, pulling up the email on my computer. "I have the delivery receipt right here. The estimate from the restoration company was attached." "Right. Well, it's not in your file here, sir," Frank replied, his tone suggesting this was my failing, not the company's, "so we can't move forward until that's received." This was the first point of friction, the classic "we don't have it" defense from a large, faceless entity. But it was the second "sir" that truly snagged my attention. "Okay," I said, taking a breath. "Before we go any further, just so you know, it's ma'am, actually. I'm a woman." I kept my tone light, friendly, the way I always did. It was a simple correction, a routine bit of personal information. "Okay, sir," he said, the words flowing out with no pause, no acknowledgement of what I'd just said. "As I was saying, you'll need to resubmit that report before we can proceed." The word "sir" hit my ear like a small, hard stone. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had actively ignored my correction. A flicker of genuine annoyance sparked within me. I thought back to a time in college when I'd called a pizza place, and the guy on the phone had a full 5-minute argument with my roommate, insisting he wouldn't take an order from some prank-calling little boy. It was funny then. This, coming from a so-called professional handling my legitimate insurance claim, felt different. It felt dismissive. "I can certainly resend the report right now while I have you on the phone," I said, my politeness now a conscious effort. "But I need you to understand, you're misgendering me. My name is Olivia. I am a ma'am, a miss, a woman, not a sir." I enunciated each word clearly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. There was a brief pause on his end. I could almost hear the mental shrug. "Yes, sir," he finally said, his voice flat and unchanging. "Just forward that email to claims@omniguard.com and make sure to include your policy number in the subject line." And that was it. That was the moment the polite, patient, understanding Olivia clocked out for her lunch break, and a different part of me, a part that had been honed by years of navigating mansplainers in meetings and condescending contractors, took over. He wasn't just making an error anymore. This was a choice. He was deliberately choosing to be disrespectful, hiding behind the anonymous shield of a call center headset. My problem was no longer just about a leaky pipe. It was about a man who, for reasons of his own, refused to afford me a basic, common courtesy. Fine, if he was going to make choices, then so was I. A strange, almost giddy sense of calm washed over me. The frustration I'd been feeling about the endless insurance claim paperwork, the water damage, and now this petty disrespect all coalesced into a single sharp point of clarity. My objective for this phone call had just changed. Resolving the claim was secondary. The new primary objective was to conduct a small, live-action social experiment. I diligently forwarded the email with the adjuster's report, narrating my actions for him. Okay, the email with the attached report has just been sent to the claims department. The subject line includes my full policy number for your reference. "Great," he said, his voice still a dull monotone. "I'll make a note on your file, sir. It can take up to 48 hours for the system to update once the documents are processed." I took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. This was it. "I appreciate you making that note for me, ma'am," I said, my voice perfectly level, professional, and pleasant. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and profound. It was a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of him typing or reading my file, but a silence of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. It lasted for a full 3 seconds. "What did you just say?" he finally asked, the boredom in his voice replaced by a flicker of confusion. "I said I appreciate you making the note on my file, ma'am," I repeated, enunciating clearly. "Will that 48-hour processing time be visible on my online portal, or is that just an internal estimate?" Another pause, longer this time. I could almost see the gears grinding in his head, trying to process what was happening. Was he hearing things? Was this a joke? "It's an internal estimate," he stammered, his script-reading rhythm completely thrown off. "Sir, thank you for clarifying that, ma'am," I chirped. "That's very helpful." The game was afoot. With every question he asked, every piece of information he robotically dispensed, my response was peppered with a polite, respectful, "Ma'am." "So you'll call back in 2 days to check the status, sir?" "Yes, ma'am. I will do that." "And do you have any other questions for me at this time, sir?" "No, I believe that covers it for now, ma'am. You've been very helpful." His tone began to shift dramatically. The initial confusion curdled into irritation. He started speaking faster, his words clipped. The conversation about my actual insurance claim had completely stalled. He wasn't talking about water mitigation or policy clauses anymore. He was just trying to get through a sentence without me calling him ma'am, and he was failing spectacularly. The power dynamic of the call had inverted so completely it was almost comical. He had started with all the power, the gatekeeper of my claim, the dismissive agent. Now he was a flustered, sputtering participant in a bizarre play that he had unwittingly co-written. I, on the other hand, had never felt more in control. I was calm, I was focused, and I was having a surprisingly good time. The beauty of my strategy was its unassailable politeness. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't insulting him, I was, on the surface, being a model customer. My tone was consistently pleasant. My ma'ams delivered with the same cadence one might use for sir. It was this very civility that seemed to enrage him the most. He couldn't accuse me of being abusive or unprofessional because I was mirroring the exact form of address he had been using with me, just with a different gendered honorific. He was being force-fed his own medicine, and it was clearly a bitter pill to swallow.
"Look," he finally snapped, his voice sharp and cracking with frustration. "You've called me ma'am like 5 times now. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to stop."
"I'm not sure I understand, ma'am," I replied, my voice a portrait of innocent confusion. "I'm just trying to be respectful."
"Respectful? You keep calling me a woman," he practically shouted, all pretense of professional detachment now completely gone.
"Oh, I see," I said, pausing as if for a moment of dawning comprehension. "You don't identify as female. My apologies. It can be so difficult to tell over the phone sometimes, can't it? I have a deep voice for a woman, so I get mistaken for a sir all the time. It's a simple mistake to make." I let that hang in the air for a moment. The unspoken, "just like you did, you absolute hypocrite," echoing in the silence.
He was sputtering now, his words tripping over each other in his haste to reassert his masculinity. "It's not a simple mistake when you keep doing it. I am a man. M-A-N. My name is Frank." This was the moment. The glorious, beautiful, exquisitely ironic climax of my little experiment. The man who had repeatedly, willfully ignored my polite correction was now screening his own gender at me, demanding the very respect he had so blithely refused to give. The laughter was bubbling up inside me, a joyous, almost uncontrollable wave. I had to press the phone against my shoulder and bite my lip to keep from bursting out laughing. I took a deep, steadying breath, composing myself. My voice, when I spoke, was as serene as a calm lake. "I understand completely, ma'am. Thank you for clarifying your preference. I will be sure to remember that for the future." The sound he made was something between a gasp and a groan. It was the sound of a man who had been so thoroughly, so politely outmaneuvered that his brain simply short-circuited. He had no recourse. He couldn't hang up and report me for being rude. I hadn't sworn, I hadn't yelled. I had simply refused to validate his identity in the exact same way he had refused to validate mine. The perfect, symmetrical justice of it was breathtaking. My comeback wasn't loud or aggressive. It was a quiet, relentless campaign of mirrored disrespect. I had taken control of the narrative, not by escalating the conflict, but by turning his own weapon back on him with unwavering, cheerful precision. He was drowning, and I was calmly explaining the properties of water to him. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear him breathing, a ragged, frustrated sound. He was trapped. If he continued the call, he would have to endure more ma'ams. If he hung up, he would be admitting defeat. For a man like Frank, whose entire professional persona seemed to be built on a foundation of bored indifference and minor power trips, both options were probably agonizing. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" he finally choked out, completely avoiding any honorific at all. "Progress?" "No, I think we've covered everything, Mem," I replied, unable to resist one final parting shot. "Thank you so much for your time." And that was it. That was the final straw. There was a click, followed by the immediate, unmistakable hum of a dial tone. He had hung up on me. He had cracked completely.
I slowly lowered the phone from my ear and placed it back in its cradle. The silence of my home office rushed in to fill the void left by his frustration. For a moment, I just sat there, a wide, incredulous grin spreading across my face. Then the laughter started. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a deep, rolling, cathartic laugh that came from the very pit of my stomach. I laughed until tears streamed down my face. I laughed for the absurdity of it, for the perfect poetic justice, for the sheer, unadulterated satisfaction of it all.
The insurance claim, of course, was still unresolved, but in that moment I couldn't have cared less. I had achieved something far more valuable than a processed payment for my water-damaged drywall. I had fought a small but significant battle against casual, everyday disrespect and won a decisive, hilarious victory. I had taken a moment of frustration and invalidation and spun it into a memory that I knew would make me laugh for years to come. Later that afternoon, feeling refreshed and oddly empowered, I called OmniGuard Insurance again. "Hello," I said to the new representative, a pleasant-sounding woman named Susan. "I was disconnected from my previous call. I'd like to speak to a supervisor, please." When the supervisor came on the line, I calmly explained the situation, omitting my ma'am counteroffensive, simply stating that the previous representative had been unhelpful, dismissive, and ultimately hung up on me. An official complaint was filed. My claim was reassigned and, miraculously, processed within 2 days. I never found out what happened to Frank. Maybe he got a talking to from his supervisor. Maybe he didn't. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that for one glorious 10-minute stretch on a Tuesday lunch break, a man who refused to listen was forced to confront the sheer, maddening absurdity of his own behavior. And I have to say, the memory of his sputtering, impotent rage is a far greater compensation than any insurance check could ever be. It was, without a doubt, the most satisfying customer service call of my entire life.
In a world full of small, frustrating indignities, sometimes the most powerful response isn't anger, but irony. When politeness is met with dismissal and a simple correction is ignored, reflecting a person's own behavior back at them can be more effective than any argument. You don't always need to raise your voice to make your point. Sometimes, a calm, persistent, and pointedly misused ma'am is all it takes to teach a memorable lesson and the simple, fundamental art of listening and respect.